In the stillness before dawn, the world holds its breath, far from the noise of kings and conquests. Nestled within a quiet, stone-walled village where the air smells of damp earth and the distant memory of apples, there stands a bakery. It is old, older than most remember. Its stones are worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, and the timber above its door sighs, each night with the changing temperatures expanding, contracting as if breathing with the night. The village lies under the watch of a pale moon wrapped in a fog as soft as lamb's wool, and every rooftop, every chimney, and every garden path glistens faintly with dew. Lanterns are out, windows dark, chimneys asleep. Not a soul stirs except one inside. The bakery, beneath wooden beams darkened by age and soot, a single candle flickers. Its small flame dances against the stone walls, casting long shadows that stretch and lean like sleepy ghosts. The wax melts slowly. A single droplet slides down, soundless, onto the worn wood of the work table, and there is Tomlin, the baker, not yet old, but far from young. His hair, once the color of honeycomb, now dusted with white, or is it flour? In this place it is hard to tell. He moves slowly, softly, as though the walls themselves might be dozing, and to disturb them would be rude. He doesn't speak. There is no need to. He has done this every morning, or rather every night, for as long as the bell in the chapel has rung. He ties the apron round his waist, thick linen that smells faintly of ash and barley, and stands for a moment in silence. The oven is cold, a dome of dark stone at the back of the room, its mouth black and quiet. Tomlin approaches it, carefully stacking dry wood, pine and oak, chosen not just for their burn, but for their scent. He places kindling beneath, touches flint to steel, a spark, then another, then a flicker, a breath, a flame. The fire stretches upward, timidly at first, then stronger. It crackles gently, as if clearing its throat after a long nap. The warmth begins to spread. The room breathes in. He stands beside it, hands near the growing glow, fingers cracked from flour and fire, rubbed together slowly. The silence wraps around him, thick as a woolen cloak. From the corner he lifts the sack, coarse linen, knotted tightly. Inside is flour, milled just 2 days ago by the old mill near the stream, where water still turns the wheel even in moonlight. He opens it gently, scooping the powder into a wooden bowl. It flows like snowfall, soft and silent. Next comes the water, drawn yesterday and left to settle in a clay jug, cool from the stone shelf. He pours slowly. The stream of water hits the flour with a soft sigh. A pinch of salt follows, then a drop of honey, barely a whisper of sweetness. Not enough to taste, but enough to soften the spirit of the dough. And now, the work. Tomlin dips his hands into the bowl, fingers vanishing into the mixture. Slowly he folds, presses, folds again. The dough begins to take shape, rough at first, resisting, but he is patient. He always is. Over and over he kneads. The rhythm is gentle. Press, fold, turn. Press, fold, turn. Like waves brushing the same rock for 1,000 years. The dough sighs. It stretches. It learns to yield. The bowl shifts slightly on the table, a low creak of wood against wood. The room begins to smell faintly, barely of bread that hasn't yet been born. Above, a mouse scampers softly in the rafters. Tomlin doesn't look up. He knows the sound. He knows them all. He divides the dough into rounds. 7 tonight. His hands shape each one with the care of someone sculpting memory. The surface of each loaf is smoothed, then scored with a small wooden blade across, lightly etched, tradition. Nothing more, nothing less. He covers them with cloth. They will rise, slowly, in silence. He steps back, wipes his hands, returns to the bench beside the oven. The fire glows warmly now, the room flushed with orange and gold. The shadows dance more slowly. Outside, the mist begins to fade. A cock somewhere far off lets out a questioning crow, unsure if it's time, unsure if anyone is listening. Tomlin smiles, just a little. He lifts a small kettle to the edge of the oven's mouth. It rests there like a secret. Inside, herbs, chamomile, mint, a touch of fennel. He leans back, resting on a stool that creaks with age. The heat touches his boots. His eyelids fall just slightly. He does not sleep, but he drifts into thought, into rhythm, into the slow tick of unseen clocks. He listens to the dough rising, not with ears, but with memory. With heart, he thinks of his father, and of his father's father, both bakers, both long gone, and yet still here in every fold of cloth, in every scar on the table, in every ember that curls in the oven. Time passes, though no one notices. The loaves are ready. He lifts the cloths. The dough has risen, not dramatically, but just enough. Like a breath held and then exhaled. He dusts the peel, a long-handled wooden paddle, and one by one slides the loaves onto its surface. They wobble slightly, soft as clouds. With care, he opens the oven, its heat brushing his face like summer wind, and slides the first loaf in. A faint sound, the sound of beginnings. Then the second, then the third. Each loaf enters the oven with a soft sigh. Like being tucked under a warm blanket. The fire crackles again, pleased. He closes the oven door. Not fully, just enough to hold the heat, but let the air move, just enough to let the bread breathe. The smell begins slowly, first warm, then deep, then golden. It wraps itself around the room, curling into corners, whispering up beams, climbing through cracks in the window to drift into the sleeping village. In the blacksmith's cottage, a baby turns in its cradle. In the chapel, a candle flutters without. Flame dot in the tavern's empty hearth. A piece of coal shifts and settles. And still the baker waits. Still the fire burns. Still the loaves rise, and crack, and brown. And the world, the very small, quiet world of this place turns ever so gently toward morning. Asterisk, the fire in the oven crackles gently, like the whisper of a forgotten story as the first loaf begins to brown. Watches the oven door, his eyes half closed, his hands resting on the table in front of him. The bread is slow to rise, slow to cook, but that is the way of things here. Patience is not just a virtue. It is the very air they breathe in the bakery. A soft scent starts to fill the room, curling around the low ceiling and slipping into the corners like a secret. It is the smell of warmth, of bread beginning to form its soul within the heat. Those surface cracks in places, small bursts of golden light peeking through. The crust is beginning to form, slow and sure. Tomlin can almost feel it in his bones. The change, the growth, the quiet satisfaction of something becoming whole. He leans back against the worn wooden chair, his legs aching from hours of standing, his boots heavy with the dust of the floor. Outside, the world is still wrapped in the quiet embrace of night. the stars dimming as the first hints of dawn stretch their fingers across the sky. Inside the bakery, time moves differently. Here, it stretches and yawns, never in a hurry. The room feels smaller now, cozy with the heat of the oven and the soft flicker of the candle. The light plays over the walls, tracing the edges of old shelves filled with dried herbs and clay pots. The shadows on the ceiling dance gently with the movement of the flame. In the far corner, the cat stirs, its fur a dark streak in the dim light, but it doesn't rise. It remains curled in a tight ball of sleep, as if content to remain in this place of warmth and stillness. Thomlin stands slowly, his joints creaking with the motion. He walks to the oven, pushing the wooden door open just a crack. The heat rushes out to greet him, soft and inviting. He pulls the first loaf from its resting place inside the oven, sliding it onto the peel with a slow, deliberate motion. The crust is a deep golden brown, crackling softly as it cools. He turns it over gently, inspecting the bottom. Perfect. It is ready. With care he sets the loaf on the table, the soft scent of fresh bread filling the air, mingling with the warmth of the fire. It's an old rhythm, this one the same as it always has been. The baker's work is never done in haste. It is always done with quiet grace, with the calm assurance that every small movement matters. Every detail counts. The second loaf is ready, its surface crisp and golden, a light dusting of flour still clinging to its curves. Thomlin slides it onto the peel, repeating the process with the same careful precision. He watches it for a moment longer, as if admiring the work of his hands, the fruit of his patience. In the corner of the room, the clock ticks slow, steady, measured. The sound is a reminder that time moves on, whether one is ready or not. Thomlin stands still for a moment, listening to it, watching the fire flicker. He thinks of his father, of the countless nights spent in this very room, kneading dough and watching bread rise. He thinks of his father's father and the long line of bakers before him. They are all here, in this room, in this moment. In every loaf of bread, in every fire that warms the room, in every crack of the oven door, a soft sigh escapes him. It is a contented sigh, a sigh that speaks of years spent in the same place, doing the same thing, and yet never tiring of it. There is a beauty in the ordinary, in the small, repetitive acts of life. Thomlin knows this. He feels it in his bones, deep within his heart. Outside, the first bird calls to the dawn. It is a soft, high note, just the beginning of the song that will soon fill the morning air. Thomlin looks toward the window, the thick fog outside slowly lifting, revealing the dark outline of the village. The rooftops are still wet with dew, the stone paths quiet and empty. The world is waking, but here in the bakery, time is slower, as if the dawn is taking its time to arrive. Thomlin moves back to the table, wiping his hands on his apron. He begins to slice the first loaf, his knife cutting through the golden crust. With ease, the crumb is warm and soft, still faintly steaming as it is revealed. He places the slices on a wooden board, the edge of the knife gliding smoothly through the bread. It is the work of a lifetime. This simple act of slicing bread, this quiet task that has been passed down through generations. The warm bread, fresh from the oven, gives off a soft, inviting scent. The room feels fuller now, the air heavier, with the fragrance of yeast and flour, with the promise of comfort. Thomlin sets down the knife and leans against the table, his eyes drifting to the bread. For a moment, he is lost in the soft glow of the fire, the crackle of the flames, and the smell of freshly baked bread. The cat stirs again, its tail flicking in the dim light. It stretches, yawns, and then settles back into its comfortable spot. Tomlin smiles softly, shaking his head. It's a quiet, simple life. He feels it deep within his chest. He is part of this place, part of the slow, steady rhythm of the village. He is as much a part of it as the bread he bakes, the fire that warms the oven, and the shadows that dance on the walls, as the first light of dawn creeps through the small window. Tomlin pulls the last loaf from the oven. The warmth of the bread fills the room, mingling with the scent of smoke and wood. The fire in the oven crackles one last time, and Tomlin closes the door, letting the last of the heat fade away. He steps back from the oven, his work done for the night. The bread is resting now, cooling slowly on the table. It will be ready when the village wakes. The bakery is quiet again, the stillness of the night returning, but now it is a different kind of quiet. It is the quiet of a job well done, the quiet of a man at peace with his work and with the world. Outside, the village stirs. A rooster crows in the distance. The first rays of sunlight begin to spread across the rooftops. But inside the bakery, Tomlin stands still, looking at the bread. There is no hurry, no rush, only the quiet satisfaction of a night well spent. The sky outside had softened to a pale grey. No longer night, not yet morning. That in-between time, a gentle moment, like the pause between inhale and exhale. Delicate, quiet, patient, Tomlin stood still near the wooden table, now lined with cooling loaves. Steam still lifted from them like faint, dreamy clouds, curling in slow spirals before disappearing into the warm air. The smell had deepened now. Not just flour and fire, but earth, hearth, and history. The scent of bread that carried something ancestral, something soothing, something safe. He moved without sound across the stone floor, the leather of his boots soft and worn from years of pacing this path, from counter to oven, from oven to window. Every creak in the floorboards overhead was known to him. Every flicker of light from the small window was familiar. The beams, the walls, the chipped clay pots in the corner, all were companions, not objects. He reached for the kettle that sat near the oven's mouth. The water had been gently simmering, warmed not to boil, but to comfort. He poured the infusion of mint and chamomile into a clay cup, its edges uneven, handmade long ago by a neighbor now buried beneath the old elm tree. The steam lifted. He held the cup between both palms and sat on the low stool beside the fire, its coals glowing. No longer flames, just glowing hearts of ember. The light bathed his face in a dull orange warmth. He closed his eyes for a moment. In that stillness, his mind wandered, not sharply, but like a leaf floating downstream. He remembered his childhood, when his father baked through the night, and Tomlin would wake too early, tiptoe to the edge of the stairs, and watch. His father never turned around, never spoke. But somehow Tomlin always felt known. The way the dough moved beneath large, flour-covered hands, the crackle of fire, the shine of sweat on his father's brow. These were his lullabies. Now Tomlin was the lullaby, and soon footsteps would return to this place. He sipped the tea slowly. The warmth slipped down his throat and spread to his chest. He could feel his heartbeat matching the rhythm of the bakery, slow, grounded, timeless. Then came the sound, distant. Soft dot, the first wooden cartwheel. Turning, it creaked slightly. As it rolled over the cobblestones, one of the milkmaids, perhaps, or the man who sharpened knives. It didn't matter. The village was stirring. One breath at a time, Tomlin stood. He moved to the front door and lifted the wooden bar that held. It closed. With a faint groan, the door opened outward. The cold air kissed his cheeks, but he didn't flinch. He looked out over the square. Mist still clung to the ground like a sleeping dog. The rooftops glistened with dew, and beyond the fountain at the center of the square, smoke began to rise from a chimney. A candle flickered behind a window across. The lane, the village was waking. He stepped outside for just a moment, feeling the air fill his lungs. It smelled of damp stone, horsehay, and the faintest hint of lilac. He stood silently, watching the world blink open its eyes. From the corner of his vision, he saw her, old Marda, wrapped in 3 shawls, one slipper slightly dragging, her grey hair tied in a knot so tight it could barely be seen. She was carrying a wicker basket and heading slowly, always slowly, toward the bakery. She came every morning. He stepped back inside and took the first round loaf from the cooling board. It was still warm, soft at its center, hard at the edges like the earth itself. He wrapped it gently in a cloth and set it on the wooden shelf beside the door. The bell above the door jingled a small sound, like a sheep's bell in the fog. Still dark when I left. Marda croaked gently, more to herself than to him. Tomlin smiled. He nodded. No need for words. He handed her the loaf. Her fingers knotted like the roots of a tree, closed slowly around it. She held it close to her chest as though it might disappear. She said nothing more, just turned. The bell rang again as she left. This was the rhythm. This was how it began every day. One by one they would come, not in a rush. No, they never hurried. There was no need. He returned to the table, laid out more loaves, picked up a small cloth to wipe the board clean. His hands moved automatically, guided not by thought but by repetition, years and years of doing. Knowing, feeling, outside, the sounds grew hooves on stone, buckets clanking, the distant shout of someone calling for a child, a door slamming somewhere far off, the clink of milk bottles being delivered. And all the while the sky brightened inch by inch, changing from grey to pearl to pale gold. Inside, the bakery remained warm, the fire low, the scent thick, the loaves now lined in perfect humble rows, crusts glistening, a few cracks deepening. As they cooled, they looked like small hills, lined up to meet the dawn. The bell rang again, then again. Each time, Tomlin moved with the same quiet grace, a loaf wrapped, a nod exchanged, sometimes a coin, sometimes not. It didn't matter. The bakery was part of the village, not a place of business, but a place of belonging. A young boy came in, red-cheeked barefoot. He whispered good morning, as if the walls might scold him for waking them. Tomlin handed him a smaller loaf, round like a pebble, wrapped in cloth. The boy's smile was wide. He whispered thanks, turned, and ran. Outside, bells began to ring from the small church on the hill. Not urgently, just enough to tell the village the sun had arrived. Tomlin looked to the loaves. 3 remained. He smiled. There would be no leftovers. Today he returned to his stool, picked up his tea, now cooler, but still fragrant, and held it near his chest. The cat jumped from its spot near the window and curled up on his foot. He watched the sun spill golden light across the floorboards. He listened to the village live, and he let himself breathe slowly, deeply, without weight. For now, all was done, and all was well. By late morning, the village had come alive with a kind of quiet purpose. It was never loud here. not even at its busiest, only full of footsteps, full of creaking wheels and quiet conversation, full of horses, snorts, and the clang of distant tools. In the square outside the bakery, the well splashed gently as buckets rose and fell. Voices drifted in like soft wind, words muffled by stone walls, and the breath of bread still lingering thick in the air. Thomlin had given away the last loaf just as the sun had crested the eastern eaves. A young mother, her infant bundled in shawls, had received it. She didn't speak, only nodded, and the look in her eyes was enough. Gratitude needs no words. Now the oven was cool, the fire nothing more than a memory in ash and ember. The bakery was still, the kind of stillness, not born of emptiness, but of completeness, the kind that settles after something important has ended or begun. Thomlin sat once more by the hearth, the cup of tea long finished but still in his hands. His fingertips traced the curve of the clay. The cat had moved again, now stretched across the warmest patch of stone, tail flicking in a rhythm only cats understand. Sunlight spilled through the high, narrow window, catching particles of flour in the air. They hung like tiny stars, suspended and spinning slowly, lazily. It gave the room the feeling of floating, as though the bakery were adrift in time. Somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow, he leaned his head back against the wall, eyes half-lidded. Not quite asleep, not quite awake. His mind wandered to her. He hadn't thought of her in some time, or perhaps he always had, just quietly. Her name had been Lyra, hair the color of walnut wood, eyes deep like lake water after rain. She had once stood in this very bakery, not often, not loudly, just once. One morning, long ago, she had come in from the rain, soaked through, cheeks pink from the chill, and had asked if she might sit by the fire while her shoes dried. He'd said yes, of course, and she'd stayed, only for a few minutes. But something about the way she sat quiet, observing, hands resting in her lap, had never left him. They'd spoken, later. Not that day, but the next, and the next, for weeks. Always briefly, always by chance. She had come through the village as a traveller, a singer, she said, though he never heard her sing. One day she had gone. A note left beneath the breadcloth. "Thank you, Thomlin." That was all. No signature, no promise. Just her name, lingering in his chest like a song unfinished. He exhaled slowly. Not sad, just ... filled. The way a cup holds water, no more, no less. The silence deepened from outside. A church bell rang, midday. Its sound soft, rounded by distance. It echoed through the narrow lanes and curled through the bakery's open window. Thomlin stood. His knees creaked, but he didn't mind. He moved to the back of the room, where a narrow door opened into the storeroom. Cool air met him, earthy and clean. The walls here were lined with barrels and sacks, flour, salt, dried fruit, yeast, bricks like crumbling stone. And on the top shelf, near the far corner, a jar. He reached for it slowly, dust stirring as his fingers touched glass. Inside was a collection of ribbons, scraps of fabric twisted and curled, some blue, some green, one pale lilac. Lyra, single quotes, as she had dropped it one morning, and he'd meant to return it. He never had. He untied the jar, removed the ribbon carefully. Its edges were frayed now, but the scent, faint, barely there, still reminded him of that morning's rain. He stood there for a long time, then returned it gently to the jar and closed the lid. Back in the main room, the sunlight had shifted. It now cast golden stripes across the floorboards, warming the very center of the bakery. The cat had stretched again, now lying belly up, a portrait of peace. Thomlin sat at the table and pulled an old ledger from beneath the counter. Not for business, no. He didn't write numbers. He wrote names. Every person who came to the bakery, every morning, every loaf he gave, he wrote it down, not out of duty, but remembrance. Marda, Wilshaw, slow step, no teeth, but still strong. Joren, the shoemaker's son. Laughs through his nose. Likes round loaves. Mother with child. No name yet. Thin wrists, tired eyes. He turned the page. Each line was a prayer in its own right. A record of life, lived quietly. On the next page, without thinking, he wrote, Lyra. Rain in her shoes, warm by the fire, ribbon lilac. Eyes deep, he smiled, just slightly. And then he closed the book. The shadows had begun to lengthen now. Afternoon stretching its arms. A breeze touched the curtains, fluttering them gently. The smell of outside began to change, warmer, dustier, as if the village itself had begun to sweat. He moved to the doorway again, looked out over the square. Children played now, their bare feet kicking up puffs of dust. A dog barked once, chasing its tail. The sound of laughter rolled across the stones like water. He didn't step out, just stood, hands resting on the wooden frame. The bakery behind him breathed. In the soft wind, it had no more loaves, no more fire, just silence, just peace. And the warm memory of flour in the air, still floating, still shining in the sunlight. The village had settled into the warm hush of afternoon shadows, stretched long across the square, gently draping themselves over stone and shutter, well and wall. The children who had laughed and chased each other now sat quietly near the fountain. Dipping their fingers into the cool water, their voices lowered to a murmur. Inside the bakery, all was still. The loaves were gone. The table had been wiped. The fire was now ash, a soft grey memory in the oven's belly. Only the scent of bread remained, faint but lingering, embedded in the walls, in the beams, in the very breath of the place. It was the smell of nourishment, of morning past, of something meaningful completed. Thomlin stood at the back of the bakery, near the narrow stairs that led upward to his sleeping room, a small space beneath the roof, angled with low beams, just tall enough to stand. He rarely went there during the day, but today he felt drawn, not by reason, but by rhythm, the natural quiet that sometimes asks a man to rise and rest without sleep. The stairs creaked beneath his boots, one by one, the sound soft and rhythmic. He reached the top and paused. The room was dim, lit only by a small, slanted window that faced the west, where the sun's light was growing golden. The bed sat low to the ground, a straw-stuffed mattress wrapped in thick linen, topped with a woolen blanket worn smooth from use. Beside it, a small table. On it, a candle, a dry sprig of rosemary, and an old tin cup with a crack running down its side. Against the wall, a wooden chest with iron corners, sealed but not locked. Dust clung to its edges. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave slightly under his weight. He rested his elbows on his knees and looked out the window. From this view, he could see the hills, beyond the rooftops, past the narrow fields of rye and barley. The land rose in slow, soft mounds, green and gold, dusted with wild flowers even now. He watched a flock of birds scatter and reform in the sky, like a breath being drawn and released again. He thought of his mother, briefly. She had loved the hills, often took him walking there as a child, collecting wild herbs, humming songs. She never remembered the words she used to press dried petals between the pages of her cookbook. He still had it somewhere. The pages yellowed, the cover cracked, but her handwriting, steady, slanted, full of small curls, still lingered there. Recipes written more by instinct than instruction. He smiled at the memory. It rose like steam from a fresh loaf, delicate and warm. Then, slowly, he leaned back onto the bed, folding his arms beneath his head. The ceiling above him showed old wood, knots and swirls in the grain like sleeping eyes. He traced them with his gaze. The wind outside shifted, not loud, but just enough to rattle the shutters once. His eyes closed, but he didn't sleep. Instead, he drifted, the way flowers sometimes floats in sunlight, moving with air to soft to feel in that place between. Wakefulness and dreams, Thomlin found himself in another morning. Younger hands, a brighter sky, the oven crackling louder than he remembered. Or perhaps he'd simply forgotten the way it once sounded. He saw his father's silhouette, broad shoulders, thick hands, moving dough like it was part of his own body. He remembered how safe that had felt watching, knowing nothing could go wrong in that room while the fire burned and the bread rose. And then another image, a different light, a market square, Lyra again, laughing this time, not in the bakery, but beneath a canvas canopy where apples and jars of honey were sold. Her hand reached out to take his, not tightly, just gently, like someone holding onto a promise made without words. He exhaled and opened his eyes. The light had changed. The golden glow was now softer, lower, a kind of pre-veining that settled, with grace over rooftops and doorways. The warmth had not faded, only grown quieter, gentler, like a fire banked low but not out. He sat up to low. In the bakery, a faint sound, wood tapping wood. Someone at the door. He arose, descended the stairs slowly, the familiar rhythm returning with each step. He passed the long bench where the bread had cooled, empty now, but not lonely. He reached a door and opened it. A boy stood there, no more than 10, holding a wooden flute in one hand and a pouch of coins in the other. His eyes were wide and his feet shuffled nervously. "Ma'am sent me," he said. "She said we'd pay extra if there was anything left." Thomlin smiled gently. "All gone," he said. "All but one." The boy's eyes lit up. Thomlin disappeared briefly into the pantry, returned with a small uneven loaf, not large, not pretty, but whole and warm, one he'd set aside earlier, without quite knowing why. He wrapped it in cloth and handed it to the boy. The child offered the pouch of coins, but Thomlin waved it away. "Tell your ma'am to keep it," he said softly. "This one's paid for." The boy blinked. By who? Thomlin only smiled. By the day itself. The child's brow furrowed, unsure of what that meant, but he nodded anyway, held the bread close, and ran off down the lane. The door closed gently behind him. Thomlin turned. The bakery felt full again, not of people, not of bread, but of something. Deeper moments, memories, the slow rhythm of a place where time moved gently. He returned to his chair. The cat, now awake, jumped into his lap with little ceremony. He stroked its fur absently, eyes distant and outside. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, painting the village in long shadows and amber light. Another day was fading, but the night had not yet begun. Not quite, not yet. Evening tiptoed gently into the village, not with a shout, nor with haste, but with long shadows and the hush of cooling stone. The warmth of the afternoon faded slowly, replaced by a subtle crispness that curled around chimney tops and slipped beneath door frames. Inside the bakery, Tomlin sat in silence. The cat had left his lap, now curled in a perfect crescent near the oven's still mouth, basking in the last heat the bricks would give. The scent of bread had mellowed, no longer sharp or sweet, but woven into the very air, part of the walls, the beams, the soul of the room. The wooden chair beneath him creaked softly as he shifted his weight. His fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, not from impatience, but from quiet thought, like the tapping of rain on the edge of a roof. Outside the window, the village began to prepare for sleep. Windows were shuttered, boots were removed, fires were banked, children were gathered and bathed, their voices low with the weight of the day. Tomlin stood. The room was dim now, the only light a soft strip of gold spilling through the small window above the bench. He walked to it slowly and opened the shutter with care. The hinges moaned slightly old iron, old wood, but it felt good to let the air in again. The breeze had changed. It now smelled of turned soil, of smoke from distant fires, and a faint trace of lavender carried down from the chapel garden on the hill. He leaned on the window sill, arms folded, and looked out. The bakery sat at the edge of the square, just across from the well. From here, he could see the narrow road that led up toward the ridge, a winding path that disappeared into the trees. Once, long ago, he'd walked that path each week, delivering loaves to a small monastery nestled beyond the rise. The monks there kept bees and silence, and traded jars of golden honey for bread. That exchange had ended many years ago, when the youngest among them had died and the others had returned to the city. Still, Tomlin often thought of them, the quiet, the way their robes moved like water, the sound of bees buzzing in the stillness. Now, the ridge lay quiet, the trees undisturbed. But the path was still there, faint, overgrown in places, but always waiting. He drew in a long breath and closed the shutter once more. The room dimmed again, fading into soft, welcoming dusk. He moved to the cupboard and lit a small oil lamp. The flame sputtered once, then caught, its glow stretching upward in a lazy flicker. Shadows returned to the room, not threatening but familiar. They leaned gently along the walls, as if settling into sleep themselves. Tomlin took the lamp and climbed the narrow staircase. Once again up in his small room beneath the roof. The light danced along the beams, casting golden warmth into corners long untouched. He set the lamp on the table and opened the wooden chest at the foot of his bed. Inside were tokens of time-folded linen, a carved wooden whistle, a dried bundle of sage, a small copper bell, and beneath them all, a book. It wasn't a real book, not in the traditional sense. Its cover was soft leather, the pages inside rough and uneven, hand-bound with twine. He had made it himself, long ago, not to keep records or recipes, but stories. He sat on the bed and opened it slowly. The first page was blank. The second held a few words in his own hand, written with a charcoal stub. They were not poetic. They were not grand. Just a few lines about a market day, the taste of plums, the way the air smelled after a summer rain. He flipped through more pages. A note about the miller's dog chasing its own shadow. A memory of the harvest festival when lanterns filled the sky. A sketch of an apple, round and imperfect. With a bite taken out, each page was quiet, simple but alive. He turned to a fresh page, and slowly, without urgency, he began to write. This evening, the wind came down from the chapel hill. It carried lavender and the faintest memory of bees. The oven is cold now, but the warmth lingers in the floor. I gave away the last loaf. I had saved it without knowing why. The child smiled. That was enough. He paused, then added, I thought of the monks, of honey, of the way silence sometimes says more than words. He stopped, tapped the charcoal against the page gently, and closed the book. It wasn't finished. It never was, but it was enough for today. He placed the book back in the chest, along with the sage and the whistle, and closed the lid with a quiet thump. Down below, the bakery settled deeper into stillness. He could hear it, not in sound, but in sensation. A calmness in the floorboards, in the air. The bakery breathed, just as he did. Slowly, deeply. He stood again and walked to the window. The lamp cast his reflection faintly across the glass, overlapping with the fading light outside. The stars had begun to appear, first one, then another, pale, uncertain things, as if unsure whether to shine. But they would, they always did. The moon was still low, a silver sliver barely peeking over the distant ridge. But it, too, was rising. Thomlin watched for a while. He thought of nothing in particular, only this. The world was quiet, and in the quiet things grew. Bread, children, shadows, memory, and sometimes something softer still. The stars had taken their places, one by one, like faithful companions returning to their seats in the sky. They emerged above the rooftops, settling into the cool blue velvet of night. The moon had grown bolder too, rising slow and silent, its silver glow spilling gently across the hills beyond the village. In the bakery, everything was still. Thomlin sat once more at the long wooden table downstairs, the lamp beside him glowing faintly, its light barely enough to touch the edges of the room. Yet even in the dimness, everything looked known, as though each object, each worn stone and folded cloth, had been gently exhaled from time itself. The room was no longer just a bakery. It was a memory box, vessel, a place that had kept and carried hundreds of mornings and just as many nights. His fingertips moved slowly across the table's surface, tracing the shallow grooves left by generations, a small notch where a bowl had always sat, a faint burn where a lantern had once tipped. The table was not smooth. It was honest, and in the quiet it spoke. He could almost hear them now, the voices of those who came before, not loudly, not like ghosts, just softly, like wind through wheat. His father's deep hum while kneading dough, his mother's light footfalls, carrying a jar of honey, the echo of his younger self, laughing quietly at a joke long forgotten. And even further back, before his memory began, he could imagine them, the early bakers, men and women who had shaped flour and water into something sacred long before he was born. He rose slowly and crossed to the far wall. There, beside the high shelf where the sacks of barley sat, hung an old board. Few knew what it was. It looked like a forgotten panel of wood, worn to a dull sheen. But to Thomlin, it was a diary. Each line carved into its surface marked a year when the oven had been repaired. He ran his finger along the grooves. Some dates were barely legible now, faded by time, but they were still there. 13 for 6, 1378, 1412, 1439. The last mark was his own. carved years ago when the firestones cracked and had to be replaced. He touched it gently, then turned. The cat was awake again, prowling lazily across the bakery floor, tail raised like a question mark, eyes glinting in the lamplight. It paused near the oven and stretched, then circled back to the base of the stairs and curled up without a sound. Thomlin watched it, then walked to the bench beneath the window. He sat down, listening. No carts now, no voices, just the creaking of beams above, the soft ticking of the wall clock, and once, just once, the lonely call of an owl from the ridge. It reminded him of another night, a winter night. He had been much younger, perhaps 20. The snow had fallen for 3 days straight, burying doorways, blanketing roofs. The bakery had remained warm, the oven lit through each night to protect against the cold. And one evening, just like this, a knock at the door, hurried, desperate. A traveller, lost, near frozen, face red from wind, hands shaking. Thomlin had brought him in, seated him by the fire, given him warm broth and a blanket. They never spoke much. The man had fallen asleep within minutes and stayed through the storm. When he left, he gave a stone round, polished deep blue like twilight. For the warmth, he'd said. Thomlin had kept it ever since. It still sat in the drawer near the flour bin, not because it was valuable, but because it had weight, not in grams. In memory, he stood now, moved quietly to the drawer, and pulled it open. There it was, smooth, cool, unchanging. He held it in his palm, closed his fist around it, and sat once more at the table. There are some things that do not need names, some moments that are best kept folded between hours. This stone was one of them. The oil lamp flickered, catching the edge of the mixing bowl, sending soft light dancing across the curved metal. It reminded Thomlin of the moon reflected in water, always moving, always still. Outside, the air grew colder. A faint mist curled across the square, lit silver by starlight. Chimneys no longer smoked. Doors were closed, curtains drawn. The village had surrendered to night. But here, in the bakery, Thomlin remained, not out of duty, not because bread was needed, but because this place, this quiet, warm, breathing place, was where he belonged. He walked slowly to the oven and rested, his hand against its side. It was cool now, but not empty. The heat from the day still lingered in the bricks, tucked between layers of stone and ash, refusing to vanish all at once. He could feel it, a heartbeat, long and slow. He whispered to the oven as he once had as a child. Not words, just breath, just presence, Dart. Then he turned off the lamp. Darkness settled gently over the room, like a blanket woven from night itself. The stars beyond the shutters blinked in silence, and Thomlin stood still, listening to the walls breathe, to the memories rustle, to the space between sounds and within it. Peace. The darkness wrapped itself around the bakery like an old friend. Not heavy, not frightening, but soft, close, and comforting, like a woolen cloak worn smooth with time, the kind of darkness that knows your name, the kind that arrives not to hide, but to hold. Thomlin sat once again on the bench beneath the shuttered window, the night pressing gently against the wood. His hands rested in his lap, his back leaned against the cool wall. His eyes, though open, no longer searched. There was nothing to find. Everything he needed was here. The cat had gone still, its slow breathing the only movement in the room. In sleep, it was a ball of fur and rhythm, small and eternal. The oven, now fully cold, sat like an ancient stone heart, silent, strong, resting. Even its ashes had stopped glowing. Still, the bakery did not feel empty. It felt full of breath, of memory, of things finished and things waiting to begin. In the dark, Thomlin could hear the grain of the wood, the creak of the roof beams adjusting to the night chill, the quiet sigh of flour settling in its sack. Even silence has a sound if you sit long. Enough beside it, he thought of the word hearth, a word once used for fire, but also for home. And in this space, the two had always been the same. Heat was not just warmth, it was comfort, presence, life, and even now, without flame, the hearth held something. He stood slowly, careful not to wake the cat, and moved to the old cupboard near the pantry door. Its hinges, though oiled often, still gave the faintest groan. As he opened it, inside, a small, folded wool blanket, a second one beneath it. Beside them, a small carved box made of elder wood, worn at the corners. He took it gently and brought it to the table. Sitting down again, he opened the box. Inside were bundles of dried herbs, tied with twine, not for cooking, for scent, for memory, lavender, thyme, a little mint, and one small pouch of crushed rose petals, long, faded from pink to a deep rust red. They had belonged to his mother. She used to keep them near the bed, or tucked inside her apron. To sweeten the spaces, she'd say, so even silence smiles. He took a pinch of the lavender, rubbed it softly between his fingers, and let the scent rise. It mingled with the air of the bakery, faint and floral, a thread of something, old and kind. He left the box open on the table. Some things are better left breathing. Then he moved toward the front door, unlocked it slowly, opened it just enough to step outside. The square was bathed in moonlight now, silvery, soft, and wide. He looked up. The stars were thick above the village, blanketing the sky like seeds scattered by a giant hand. He could see the belt of Orion, the curve of the big ladle, old names, ancient patterns. His father had taught them to him, said they were the baker's clock, back before the bell tower was built. If you ever get lost, his father once whispered, follow the flower in the sky. He smiled at the memory. A breeze moved through the square, tugging at the edges of his tunic, lifting the scent of earth and pine and chimney soot. It was neither warm nor cold, just there, like the touch of someone you trust. He stood in the doorway for some time, breathing slowly. The village was asleep, but not lifeless. It slumbered like a dog by a fire, twitching now and then, but at peace. He stepped back inside, closed the door with care, barred it softly and turned. The lamp was still out, but the moonlight filtered through the shutters, painting pale stripes. Across the floor, the cat had moved again, now resting near the mixing bowl, one paw tucked under its chin. Thomlin walked slowly to the flour sack, placed a hand on its side, full, ready. The day would come again soon. Not yet, but soon. There would be kneading, shaping, baking, laughter, and silence. He reached into the sack and drew out a small handful of flour, let it sift through his fingers. It fell like snowfall, light, silent, soft. He didn't clean it up. Some messes are meant to stay a little while, like echoes. He returned to the bench, closed his eyes, and listened. Again, not for anything in particular, just for the bakery itself, because old places hum if you let them. Time passed, not marked by chimes or clocks, but by the subtle shift of shadows. The moon, once high, had begun its slow descent, and the stars blinked more softly now, not from dimness, but from distance. They were drawing back, preparing to hand the sky back to the sun. Inside the bakery, Thomlin slept, but not in his bed. He sat curled at the bench beneath the shuttered window, wrapped in the wool blanket from the cupboard. His arms were folded, his chin tilted slightly downward, his breath slow and even. The cat, as if sensing this new stillness, had nestled beside his feet, a silent guardian. The bakery itself held its breath. This was the hour between night and morning, between memory and motion, between who we were and who we will. In this hour, the walls did not creak, the flour did not settle, even the air seemed to wait. And in that quiet pause, Thomlin dreamed. He dreamed of flour falling from the sky, not in a storm, but like soft snow blanketing the village square, coating rooftops and wells and trees in a fine white dust. He dreamed of bread loaves floating on rivers, their crusts glowing golden in the morning light. He dreamed of the oven, rising like a mountain, its mouth a warm, glowing cave, and inside it stars. He dreamed of laughter echoing down a hallway he didn't remember ever walking. He dreamed of Lyra, once more. This time she said nothing, only stood at the far end of the bakery, her fingers trailing along the edge of the flour bin, leaving tiny, swirling patterns in her wake. She looked at him with eyes that understood everything, and smiled, not sadly, not sweetly, but gently. A smile that meant I remembered too. And then she was gone. The dream thinned. Not abruptly, just like morning mist. Thomlin stirred, his eyes opened slowly, as though rising from water. At first all was shadow, then a pale suggestion of light, soft grey, barely visible, seeping through the edges of the shutter. The air had changed, not warmer, but different. It carried the scent of damp stone, cold ash, the distant breath of dew settling on grass. It was the scent of almost morning. He sat up slowly. The blanket slid from his shoulders. His joints ached slightly from the bench's hard surface, but he welcomed the feeling. It meant he had rested, even if just for an hour. The cat lifted its head, blinked once, and settled back down. Thomlin stood. He walked to the window and unlatched the shutter. The world outside was painted in slate and silver, still mostly asleep, but behind the hills, a line of pale gold had begun to appear. The village square was quiet. No carts, no footsteps, but not empty. The silence was alive now, filled with potential, like a held breath before a song. He turned from the window and looked around the bakery. It looked different in this light, the kind of light that reveals what daylight sometimes forgets: the dust in corners, the worn patches on the floor, the glint of flour on the edge of a table. And it was beautiful, not because it was perfect, but because it had endured. He moved to the oven, touched the stones, still cold, still waiting. He didn't light the fire yet, not immediately. Instead, he went to the table and retrieved the little box of herbs. He opened it and took a small pinch of thyme, a few lavender petals, and placed them in the corner of the hearth, a quiet offering to the oven, to the morning, to the ghosts of bread. Then he set to work, not with haste, not with chatter, but with reverence. He opened the flour sack, measured with his hands, poured water slowly, carefully into the wide wooden bowl. He sprinkled salt, like snow, and then he touched the dough. It clung to his fingers, cold and soft. But as he pressed and folded, it began to warm beneath his hands, responding to touch, waking up like muscle or memory, and with each motion, the room responded. The bench creaked, the cat yawned, the shadows shifted, and in the east, the golden line grew brighter. The first golden thread of sunlight slipped across the bakery. Floor like spilled honey, it crept through the window, illuminating the flour still scattered on the bench, glinting off the iron handle of the oven door, catching on the edges of the wooden bowl where dough now rested beneath a linen cloth. Dawn had arrived, but it had not rushed in. It had crept respectfully, reverently, like a guest knocking gently at the door of a sacred space. Thomlin stood near the hearth, one hand resting on the edge of the oven. The stones were still cool, but they would not be for long. He reached for the kindling. Small branches and split would gathered earlier in the week and arranged them with practiced care. Not just piled, but placed, as if setting the foundation for something meaningful. Then, flint, a spark, a curl of smoke. The fire came slowly, then quickly. It caught with a soft whoosh, and soon the kindling cracked and whispered as flame embraced. Wood, orange light joined the gold of the sun. Together, they warmed the walls. The oven would take time to heat, time that Thomlin knew well. He turned and crossed to the bench. The dough had risen beautifully. It breathed beneath the cloth, rising and falling almost imperceptibly, like a sleeping creature. He uncovered it, touched it, and smiled. There was a rhythm to shaping loaves, not just hands and motion, but memory. His hands folded, pressed, turned. The dough gave willingly, softly. It wasn't just bread. It was morning made physical, a promise in form. Each loaf rested in its basket, wrapped like a swaddled child, and still the bakery remained quiet, not because the world was absent, but because it was listening. He lit the lamp on the counter, not for light, but for continuity. A small flame that had seen hundreds of mornings, burning beside his father's hands, and his grandfather's before that. The cat stretched and yawned, sauntering to the corner where it always waited for crumbs. From outside, the faintest sounds. A chicken rustling in straw, the first thud of boots from the far lane, a door creaking open. The village was waking. He placed the first loaf near the oven, waiting for the right heat. There was no timer, no clock, just the feel of the stones, the smell of the flame. The knowledge passed through. Years. He placed a hand on the oven's arch, warm, not hot. Almost ready, he waited. And while he waited, he remembered the first time he lit the fire alone. He had been 12. His father had stood beside him, arms folded, silent, letting him make mistakes. The fire hadn't caught at first. Thomlin had been too eager, too rough, but on the third try it bloomed. His father said nothing, only clapped a hand on his shoulder. That single gesture had stayed with him for decades. Now he stood alone, but the warmth remained. He loaded the loaves, one by one, gentle, precise. The scent came, quickly, not overwhelming, but rising in slow waves. Yeast, wheat, the memory of fields, and sunlight and patience. This was not just the smell of bread. This was the smell of belonginga. Knock at the door, not hard, not hurried. He opened it. A woman with white hair and a shawl. She said nothing, only smiled. He handed her a loaf, still warm. She pressed his hand in thanks and walked away. Then another, a man with a cane and eyes like clouds. He didn't need to ask. Thomlin gave him the round loaf, his favorite. The line began to form. A young girl, no taller than the counter. a shepherd boy with straw in his cloak, the schoolmaster with ink on his fingers. They all came, not with coins, but with presents, and he gave them bread, not for profit, but for peace. One loaf remained. He held it in both hands, looked at it, then placed it carefully back on the shelf. Not every loaf must leave. Some are meant to stay, to remind the walls that life happened here too. Let the flower remember. The sun had now filled the square. Birds darted between rooftops. Laughter echoed faintly. The village had fully returned, but inside the bakery it was still quiet. Sacred, the fire still glowed. The loaves were gone. The cat had fallen asleep again, and Thomlin sat, not tired, not eager, only whole. The day had begun, and so had he. The day unfolded, not in a rush, not in a roar, but like a warm loaf, breaking gently in two, steam rising slowly, revealing softness beneath the crust. In the village square, children ran barefoot through the dust, there, laughter trailing behind them like ribbons. A dog barked once, then collapsed into the comfort of shadow. The smith began his hammering. The bell at the chapel let out a small, sleepy chime. But inside the bakery, time moved differently, not slower, not faster, just deeper. Thomlin moved, with quiet purpose, wiping the bench, brushing flour from the corners, folding the linen cloths. The loaves were gone now, handed off with smiles, nods, a few whispered thank yous. And yet the bakery did not feel empty. It never truly did, because what was given here, the warmth, the smell, the simple kindness of bread, lingered longer than footsteps or coins. It clung to the air, to the memory of walls, to the hearthstones, and, above all, to Thomlin's heart. He turned to the shelf. There it sat, the final loaf, the one that never left. Each day one remained, not out of accident, but by quiet tradition. It wasn't meant to be eaten, not by teeth at least. It was meant to be remembered. He took the loaf in his hands, still warm, still round, still rising with a faint breath of steam. Its crust was golden, the shape imperfect, slightly higher on one side, a small split near the top. It was beautiful, not because it was flawless, but because it was just as the baker was, just as the day was. He walked with it, not to the window, not to the door, but to the small alcove beneath the staircase. It had once been a place for firewood. Now it was a kind of shrine. Here sat loaves from days past, each wrapped carefully in linen, dried by time, hardened but unspoiled, not more than 5, not less than 3. He always rotated them, not by date, but by feeling. Today he removed the oldest, placed it gently in a clay bowl near the herb shelf, to be ground down, crumbled, and added to the soil behind the bakery. Even old bread could nourish something. Then, with slow care, he placed the new loaf in its resting spot, the loaf that never leaves, a symbol, a memory, a heartbeat. He stepped back, wiped his hands on his apron, and stood for a while, not thinking, just standing, feeling. Letting the quiet move through him like wind through wheat upstairs. The shuttered window had been opened. Sunlight spilled through it now, slanting downward, catching on the rafters. Dust motes floated lazily in the beam, each one its own tiny world, drifting without purpose, yet full of grace. The cat, tired from its short patrol of the bakery, was back near the oven. Its belly rose and fell in steady rhythm. A dream twitched in its ear, Thomlin stepped outside. The square greeted him like an old song. The sun was higher now, brushing every rooftop in golden white. Across the way, the blacksmith raised a hand. A boy on a cart waved a crust of bread. The woman by the well dipped her hands in water and smiled. These weren't grand gestures, but they were enough to remind a man that he mattered, not as a hero, not as a legend, but as a piece of something larger, something woven. He sat on the step, apron still on, a thin trace of flour across his brow. His hands rested on his knees. His gaze followed the slow curve of a cloud drifting overhead. He thought, for a moment, of stopping. Not today, but someday. He thought of what would happen when the oven finally cooled and stayed cool. When the shutter was closed and never reopened. When no more loaves were shaped, or shared, or remembered. He thought of that Dot, and he smiled, because even then, the bakery would not be gone. It would still live in stories told around tables, in the hands of children kneading pretend dough, in the taste of crust remembered by old tongues, in the way someone says, "This bread reminds me of something." That was enough. The bread would go on, as all good bread does, and so Thomlin Rose stepped back into the warmth and let the fire burn just a little longer.